Well, in this message, I want to talk about fear, what makes us afraid, what gets us really scared in the middle of the night. Have you heard the story of the little boy whose mother asked him to go out and get the broom on the porch and come inside and sweep the floor? And then he said, but Mommy, it's dark outside and it's raining and I'm scared to death to go out on that porch. There's no light out there. I'm afraid something's going to come and grab me and get me. And the mother said, oh, that's okay. You just take it easy and relax. You know, Jesus is out there and he will protect you. And so the little boy made his way to the door and he opened it up just a crack and he said, hey, Jesus, if you're out here, could you please hand me the broom? Fear. We just don't like fear in our lives. And I want to talk in this message about how to overcome that fear. I'm Stu Bamick, and I'm part of a ministry called Consequential Christianity. That Christianity is more than just a spiritual enhancement in our lives or a belief in the general notion that God exists, but it's consequential. It makes a difference in our lives. We're trying to understand all of life from God's perspective. We're in the middle of this series on becoming an overcomer, looking at the life of David. And today I want us to take a look at overcoming fear. And to do that, I want to begin by looking at the root cause or the root source or the origin of where fear comes from. I know of no better place to start talking about fear than the story of David and Goliath and the Valley of Elah. The Valley of Elah is a mile-wide long valley named after the giant Elah trees that grow there. The valley, I've been there on a trip to Israel. The valley is broad, it's wide, it's desolate, it's barren, it's filled with rocks and stones and the Elah trees. It's located in the critical corridor between the Mediterranean Sea and the high country of Judah and, of course, the capital of Jerusalem. You hold the Valley of Elah and you hold all of Israel. It's of high strategic importance to military armies and to countries and nations. That's why the valley's been the scene of epic battles throughout history. In 1187, the Muslims sent King Richard the Lionhearted from England during the Crusades. They sent him home with his tail between his legs in a great battle in the Valley of Elah. And so here we find on this day, 2,000 years earlier than that battle, 2,000 years earlier than King Richard the Lionhearted, here we find the Philistines camped out against the nation of Israel. The Philistines hold the southern valley and Israel holds the northern range of mountains, and they're squared off against each other. So here we have these two armies squared off in battle, and we have a record of that battle. Samuel writes it down for us, and he writes these words to us. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 8 and 9. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. So the terms of the battle are remarkably simple. When two armies reach a stalemate, they decide to settle it in hand-to-hand combat between their two best warriors. Your man against ours, your champion against our champion. Toe-to-toe. Winner take all. Now, the Philistines, they send this amazingly large and enormous man by the name of Goliath of Gath. He is 9 feet 6 inches tall. He wears a helmet of bronze and a coat of mail that weighs nearly 200 pounds. In his hand, he has a javelin for throwing, a spear the size of a telephone pole for hand-to-hand combat to penetrate heavy armor, and finally, the sword of Goliath, designed to finish off the job up close and personal. Then Samuel describes what takes place next. 1 Samuel 17, verse 11. He writes, when Saul and all the people of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And in verse 16, for 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. So here we find the record of a military crisis on our hands. Two great armies pitted against each other. The lines are drawn. There's a valley between them, a veritable no man's land with a giant standing smack dab in the middle. And for 40 days, he issues out this cry to Israel, give me a man. Now, it's not the nation of Israel that he's crying out to. He's crying out to the greatest warriors of the nation of Israel, of Saul's army camped on the ridge. Give me a man. In the morning, the first thing he says is, come on, somebody, come on down here and fight me. Come on. And he says the same thing in the evening, like clockwork for 40 days, day and night, 2 times a day. Is there anyone who is a man among you, a warrior who has the heart, who has the courage to come and fight me? Now, the person that's hearing this is not only the warriors of Israel, but Saul hears this challenge, this intimidating challenge. Saul is the leader. He is the king. He stands in stature above all of his men. He is expected to go and fight the champion. But he's afraid. He couldn't. His fear controls him. Fear is a powerful thing. Winston Churchill said that fear makes cowards of us all. It's when things happen on the inside of us, so that God gave us the gift of imagination, and our imagination takes over, and fears of reality get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Certainly there was a fear involved between Saul and the giant, but that fear had just escalated. It takes us to places that we can't get out of. It stands before us and it says, you're going to lose. I want you to understand the metaphor, the analogy, the symbolism that is taking place here. A giant represents our fears. It's bigger than us. It's out of our control. It wants to slay us, wipe us out. And a dark valley that we have to enter into, the valley alone, the no man's land. We have to enter into the valley to do battle with the fear which stands before us. We have no familiar landmarks. We're not assured of any kind of victory. We get terrorized, simply waiting for the knockout blow to fall. And all of us have been in those kinds of situations of fear in our lives, where the giant seems so big and the valley seems so alone. So what do we do when we have to take on that kind of fear in our lives? Now it's here that the story takes a surprising turn. There is a shepherd boy. He's the youngest of a family of shepherds. He's not at the battle. All of his brothers are there as great warriors, looking down into this valley to see this great giant that represents their fears in life. But the father of the warriors asks the young shepherd boy by the name of David if he will take lunch, some provisions for his brothers on the field of battle. And so they pack up this supply of provisions, as often would do in ancient armies, that families would send their loved ones food. And off he goes to the valley of Elah, to the ridge of the encampment of the soldiers of Israel. When he gets there, he can't believe his ears. He can't understand what he's hearing. He sees the giant come down and issue this challenge. Give me a man. Is there anyone among you that can overcome your fears and have confidence in yourself and come and fight me? Now remember, it's winner take all. You lose, you become our servants. I lose, and we become your servants. There's no in between. It's winner take all. And David, here's this challenge. He's a shepherd boy. It's the shepherd boy. But he knows that someone is messing with God and his people. And then he does something crazy for a shepherd boy. He tells his brothers, and word gets back to King Saul, and he ends up before Saul, and he says, I'll fight the giant. I'll go down into the valley. I'll take him on. I'll fight him. And fear is at times something that needs to be fought by us. It's an action. We have to go and take action and appear in the valley before the giant. And Saul says to him, well, but you're just a shepherd boy. How can you possibly go fight him? And he says, Saul, that's it. That's what I am. I am a shepherd. I make a living fighting lions and bears. Shepherd boys, we're watchful. We have to watch the sky, the heavens, the weather. We have to find places for our sheep to lay down that are protected. We have to provide for food for them and cool waters to drink. We have to be sacrificial. We have to be able to be willing to give up our lives for our sheep. I've had to fight lions and bears alone in the wilderness to protect my sheep. I'll fight him. I'll go down into the valley and fight him. And David is putting his finger on here at the root core origin of fear. Ultimately, at the end of the day, and I know this sounds hyper spiritual to those of you that are really fending off and fighting fear at this moment, but at the end of the day, fear is a lack of trust in the character, the nature, and the sovereignty of God. That God is in control. That God's got this one. And that nobody should be messing with him. Anytime we're ultimately afraid, it's the circumstance around us, the giant and the valley, that gets hold of our lives rather than the sovereignty of God himself. His omnipotence, his power, his omniscience, his all-knowing God, who takes care of us and promises to take care of us in our lives. And David understands this about his God. The spiritual truth that David is identifying here is that the root of fear is losing trust. And I just want to say this in the character and the nature of God. And the reason I hesitate a little bit is because we all have fear. We all have a lack of trust and faith in God. This is part of what the story involves, that we don't walk through life as perfect, flawless human beings. We live a life in a real world with real problems, real troubles, and real fears. And we're real people. And so we have to sort of fight off these fears in the best way we can. And the beginning of that, the root cause of it, that David is trying to tell Saul and his brothers, is you're not understanding who God really is. He's saying to them, look, it comes down to this, and this is what I've learned in the wilderness tending the sheep. It comes down to this question. Either God is in control or he isn't. There's no half control. Either he is or he isn't in control. Now, if he is in control, then David says, here's the deal. Faith overcomes fear because I can trust in someone who is in control, who is bigger than the situation, the environment, the trouble, the valley, the scared places of my life. I can trust in someone who is bigger than all of that. Either God is in control or he isn't. And that's the question, the fundamental starting point for all of us in overcoming fear is asking that question over and over again. God, are you in control? Sometimes I'll say it this way. God, what are you trying to say to me? Or sometimes I'll say it this way. God, why now? But in asking the what are you trying to say, and in asking the why now, I am saying you are in control. And you're trying to tell me something, and that there is a reason for the timing of why you are trying to tell me. So the beginning of overcoming fear is understanding the root, origin, and source of fear ultimately comes from a lack of trust in the sovereignty and the nature and character of God. And the overcoming of that comes in the understanding that our faith in that God who does exist and is bigger than anything that we will ever face from an infinite vantage point and an eternal perspective overcomes our finite, limited view of life. And when it does, we can put our faith in that God, and then faith overcomes fear. Now, in this next message, I'm going to talk about real, concrete, practical ways in which our faith overcomes our fears. I'll see you there.